our guest today is our chair of composition at Berklee, an incredible artist, educator, composer, um, Guggenheim Fellow. He's the leader and founder of the Ether Or. He's done incredible work. His credentials are worth your time to go and check out his amazing music. I'm going to drop his URL in the link in the chat as well. He has done performances, master classes, and lectures all around the world, the United States, Europe, even in Israel. He's got a really strong connection, actually, that we've talked about quite a bit in Rwanda. Working in education with the government there, in Japan, in South Korea. He was a GUGAC Fellow in 2015. He's worked at Columbia, in New York University, worked with the New York Philharmonic Teachers Artist program there, and credentials abound, releasing music, performing music, composing music all the time. Recently performed in New York City, original music, and has an upcoming show that maybe he'll share some details about. Please join me in welcoming our chair of composition, Dr. Richard Carrick. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Well, that's quite an intro. um, and it's such a pleasure to be with all of you, Itzar and Mitchell, and all the folks in Rimon. It is so good to see you all, and we hope you all stay safe, and we think of you often. And it's so nice to see everybody in the community. It's so nice to meet all these new folks from around the world. I hope we get to meet in person one day. I'm thrilled to be here. Should I just say a few things, or what
Yeah,
would you?
Richard, I think will be really interesting for folks who are meeting you for the first time is maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the recent work you've been doing as an artist, as a composer. We were just talking about this before the session started, and you were mentioning that you've got an upcoming show. You recently
Right.
were in New York performing as well. And I think for the composers and performers that are joining us here, it'd be really interesting for them to hear that, this is real time. You're doing this work now.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a composer. I have a PhD in composition. I always wanted to be a composer and a musician and a pianist. And one thing that happens when you're a student, you kind of want to do everything. And I'll just say, when you get to a certain point, you're not going to be able to do everything at once, but you're going to be able to do everything in stages. So, I did my PhD in composition. I ended up performing throughout the whole thing. I ended up conducting after that, and started becoming an active conductor because I started a new music ensemble. And then after that, there was a point where I got pretty tired with playing piano, quite honestly, because piano can't do all the cool stuff new music wants you to do. It can't do the microtonality. It can't do the pitch bends. It can't do the electronic. So I picked up the electric guitar, and I did an electric guitar album for a few years, and then I kind of came back to the piano with this new idea of how to write for the instrument. And so, maybe that's just something I'd like to say for young folks is, it looks like I'm doing a lot, but I didn't do it all in the same day. It takes time to get to all this stuff. So currently what I'm doing right now is I'm focusing on writing these kind of hour-long pieces for quartets, quintets. And the idea here is that rather than writing, in contemporary concert music, a lot of times you're asked to write a 10, 15, 20-minute piece. And that's great. And I've been doing that for years. But I wanted to write something that it's an album. It says something. It's a place where compositionally, I don't feel like I have to be super picky about what is in and what is out of the music. Everything is in. And then the music finds the right place within an hour for that to exist. And I found that compositionally, this was a way to open up. So I've been writing these hour-long pieces. The first piece is called The Atlas, and that was premiered last year in New York City. And we recorded it at the Domena Center. And the CD's coming out in February. So do check that out. It will be on Spotify or whatever. And would you like to see a little bit of that? Should we do that? Or what would you like to
I
do,
think
Jay?
that would be a great idea, just to kind of like give them a sense of, this performance. I think it would be wonderful for the participants to kind of check this out.
Okay. So this piece, what I made is, we're not going to watch the whole thing. I did make a sample reel, and we can just watch like a minute or two of it. And the idea here with this piece, I think all of you, you're all performers, you're all doing a lot of stuff. And as a composer, you want to figure out how to distill everything into something really, really pure and meaningful. And how do you find the greatest potency with what you're doing, as opposed to just kind of like doing a lot of things. You want everything to have like integrity. And one of the things I developed was, as a pianist, I really wanted to explore inside the piano and what I call extended piano or piano preparations. I've also made a video about this. If you'd like to see it, I can put it in the chat later. It's kind of an educational video. But this piece, anyways, you'll see some of the techniques that I use, and it's for piano and string quartet. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen here. We can just watch a minute or two of this. Go here. And then I'm going to go here. I think maybe I'll stop it there, but that gives you a little bit of a sense of, let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's brilliant. The the textures, the level of technical expressiveness and technical ability of this group is extraordinary. Um, can you talk a little bit about some of the influences behind a piece like this? It looks like you're really kind of stretching the boundaries of what's going on with a chamber piece like this.
Yeah, yeah. I just put that link in the chat for everybody. It's just a pedagogical link if anyone's interested in exploring extended techniques for the piano. The piece you heard, I think you heard many different influences, including at one point, uh, I made reference to an Algerian Chabi band from the 50s that was featured in this film El Gusto, and it was kind of Israelis and Arabs kind of coming together and playing this Chabi music, and they reunited in Paris in 2013, which I found very inspiring. And so that's one of the references there that you heard with the fast melody. Um, and I just, since piano is my life, and then I opened it up to all these sounds, I just wanted to see how the string quartet could kind of enhance that and create the musical flow that I was interested in being in. I mean, it got very simple at one point, this piece, but I think it's a 9 movement piece. So I think throughout the piece, and we do it without applause. So it's really to kind of create this state, and it's kind of storytelling. It's really a journey through these episodes of how you can kind of dig into the piano and dig into chamber music. You notice there's improvisation as well.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because there definitely seems some parts of just in that small sample that like, wait a minute, is that written out?
Yeah, yeah. That violinist, Jennifer Choi, is unbelievable. I mean, all the players are incredible. Really, truly, like, a dream team to work with. But we've worked together a lot. So I knew when I could kind of reach out and say, we're going to improvise this. We're going to do this until Jennifer's done. And then, if somebody's got something to say, they can throw it in here. And I think, as we know, when you're dealing mostly with notated music, when you have improvised moments, it sparks differently. Everyone in the audience feels it. And so how do you bring that into a notated piece? How do you bring that into concert music in a way that's going to enhance the overall experience?
Yeah, that's a wonderful point to bring up, because it's something with the work that you're doing as an artist and as an educator. How do you approach that with two things? One, the musicians themselves, getting them to move in that direction, to express themselves freely, get away from the page. And then how do you kind of work with your composition students to let them move in that space as well? Like, because that's like two kind of different hemispheres to look
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, it's easy with the players because you pick the players who naturally lean that way, right?
Right.
I work most of my career is in New York City, and in New York City, we have tons of musicians, and you've got like the classically trained musician that is interested in new music,
Mhm.
and the new music player. But a lot of those people, that's not enough for them. They want to do improvisation. They're working with John Zorn. They're working with like all sorts of different musical styles as well, world music and so forth. And so those are the players. They're all over the place in New York, and I'm sure in Israel it's the same thing. Your musicians are they're multifaceted. They want to express themselves in many different styles, and just find the musicians that you resonate with. Now, sometimes we have musicians that are really kind of classically trained, and when you ask them to improvise, you just show them how much fun it can be and how exciting it can be, and don't give them too much to do. You know, like that's kind of the best way to do it is you're writing. It's I think at Duke Ellington, he wrote for his players. He knew exactly what the strengths were of each of his band members, and that's what he wrote for. And it showcased them. They feel great about it, and he writes a piece that's completely unique. So that's kind of the approach I've always taken, which is tricky when you're dealing with, a string quartet, because there are lots of different string quartets. But the string quartet also has its own way of working, and so you have to know that. I mean, I guess what I'll say is I run a new music ensemble in New York. I have for 20 years. And the focus of that group, this is the group, but the focus of that group has not been to really play my music. It's really to play music that hasn't been heard in New York. That was what we started off doing. So we were playing European composers that we were playing, all these European composers that were not being played in New York. Sometimes composers from Korea and Japan, sometimes from the Middle East, and that's probably the best way you can, once you get out of school, that's one of the great things you can do to keep learning, to keep developing as an artist. to keep growing and to keep tabs on what's happening in the world. You know, I mean, through my group Either Or, I've premiered over 300 works by composers from around the world. I conducted this is kind of goofy, but I conducted a concert once with 125 new pieces on it. 125 world premieres in one concert. I think I think apparently it's a Guinness Book of World Records, but we forgot
Yeah,
to invite the
we
Guinness
need to
Book of
report
World
that.
Records there. So they didn't certify it. But you know, these are the things that it takes a lot of time, but then it really fuels your own composition.
Mhm.
So, but to answer your question about how do you work with students who are interested but don't really know
Yeah,
how
how
to
to
make
bridge
improvisation?
that gap in their composition and make the improvisation part of that compositional experience.
Right. I mean, I think you have to assume you can't assume you know what improvisation is because everybody thinks of improvisation differently. So if you know, you can't ask a student to just sit down at a piano and start improvising because that might be the least creative mode for them,
Right.
right? A more creative mode might be for them to be singing in the shower, or for them to be taking a long walk, or for them to be sitting with some friends and making music. Whatever it is, you have to find what that is for the student. That where's their comfort zone where they can feel like they're going to start to improvise. And then from that, you can kind of bring it into notation or bring it into the piece they're writing.
Now, I notice with a lot of the work that you're doing, you've got many levels of influences, artistically, culturally. Could you share a little bit about your influences, maybe how they've changed over time, and maybe what you're checking out now?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I like a lot of stuff. Um, I yeah, I mean, I I think it's funny like with the Korean traditional music, that happened because the New York Phil were flying me to Korea to do working with young composers. And I would go over there and I'd work with these young students and I'd say, well, what about your traditional music? You should incorporate that. And they're like, oh, we don't really know our traditional music because they don't learn it in school. And so I started studying it to connect with the students. And then it turns out that for me, at that point, that particular point in time, Korean traditional music sounded so much more avant-garde than a lot of the avant-garde music that I was playing because it has a completely different sound. These instruments are incredible. They're just gritty and gorgeous and expressive. That's what I resonated with. So I kind of went into that from an avant-garde perspective, really, or whatever you call a new music perspective. And then I was dealing with music from 400 years ago, hearing it in this new way, and that was very exciting. And currently, what I'm working on is, but that was about 7, 8 years ago. That was about an 8 year period. I just did something with the Korean um,
Consulate in Boston, right?
consulate in Boston. Yeah, we just did a big concert where they featured my music as like an American Korean um, armistice concert, which was pretty a huge honor. But currently, I'm working with really inspired by music of my mother's family from Algeria, and digging really deep into that music. Well, trying to anyway. There are so many great experts out there, and I'm just scratching the surface. But I find that's been really expressive and meaningful to me, and also trying to tell a story through that about a place that I've never been to, and I don't know if I'll ever visit, but um, I wanna have a connection with Algeria somehow, where our family was for generations.
I think one of the things that I'm interested in, the work that you've done over all this time is you're an artist, you're a composer, but you've actually created a vehicle. You've created space to actually create new music. And for some of the composers and the folks that are here connecting today, that are looking to find a space to realize their music for an audience, what are some of the initial steps that they would take to actually get their pieces performed and in front of an audience? They're not like seeking commissions, but they're actually like trying to move their music into the public sphere so people could actually appreciate what they're doing. What are like the first few steps that they should be looking at taking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, what I've seen in Israel is everybody is doing this. This idea, I mean, you have to do it on many levels. You have to like try to get the commissions, try
Right.
to work with the famous artists, try to work with the people that are important in your field, but also you can't wait around for that. So you have to also do it yourself. And
Mhm.
so you kind of have a multi-prong approach, which is find who are the people you know, who are the people that you've seen in the last month that are interesting musicians that you get along with. If you can identify those people, and then you just say, hey, let's do something together. I mean, I'm a big believer that if you find the right people, the project will come. But if you have a project and you don't have the right people, then the project can just sit there for years. So find the people that you click with, you know. It doesn't mean you have to agree on everything, but it means you trust them, you find them interesting. When you interact with them, is it a good interaction?
Mhm.
And and doing that, I mean, what I did is when I finished my PhD, I moved to New York City, back to New York City, which is where I was before. And I started a new music group. And we just, we got a very small grant and we did one concert. And we did that for 3 years until we could build up a 3-year track record,
Mhm.
which was by that point, that's what you needed to get city funding and state funding. So you needed 3 years. And so I just did one concert for 3 years,
Got it.
put everything in those three concerts. And they were cool concerts. They were music people hadn't heard. And for some reason, the press kind of noticed it. And then once we started getting funding, then we could grow from that.
So while you're doing this, trying to get this independent opportunity going on, what else are you doing today as a composer? What does the
Mm.
rest of your sort of career look like, beyond that? What are the other kinds of things that you're working on to kind of like complete the picture?
You mean early on?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
example.
Uh, so I like to say that in New York, you can always get a job. But the tricky thing in New York is you have to say yes to every job because it's so expensive to live there. So, so you work all the time in New York, you know? So, I mean, I did everything from like, I did a lot of teaching at, like in public schools, not like a public school teacher, but like after school programs.
Right.
I did piano teaching and all these things. I worked whatever. I mean, I wrote a book on mathematics because I have a math degree. Like, whatever work you can find, you just do it. And some people go into like working, some things that are great if you go into publicity or royalty, like if you work within the industry, you learn a lot more about the industry. I never did that, but I kind of thought, I should have done something like that.
I
You
see. Yes. So maybe working in a publishing company or in a booking agency or
know?
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. Um, I know our guests that are here are going to have a lot of questions for you, but maybe we could pivot for a moment and just could you talk a little bit about the program at Berkeley and the
Sure.
competition program, the kinds of students that you're seeing and the opportunities that they're afforded through the program and the connections that you have for them within the college and then in the industry because there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in your area.
Sure, thank you. Yeah. I got to Berkeley 8 years ago, and we've really been really proud of some of the initiatives that we've been doing at Berkeley. So the Berkeley composition majors, we have about 100 majors. We have 55 faculty who teach those students. So the students who come here have a huge variety of styles they can tap into with the faculty and skills and interests. And the program has kind of done a lot of outreach in the last few years. We developed a class where we pair up a composer with a choreographer from the conservatory because we merged about 8 years ago at the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. And so you have the opportunity to write a piece for dance that gets performed at the conservatory, which is a pretty unique program. We started a composer sinfonietta. We're building more in terms of reading opportunities. We bring in professional level string quartets every year for our students to have their pieces read. And you know, our students, they're unique. Half of them come from a classical background, half do not. And what that means is our focus is not traditional classical music. We kind of work through classical music, but we really focus on developing your individual voice as a composer, learning what's oh sorry, learning what's happening at in the contemporary field, you know, what's happening in New York, what's happening in Berlin and everything else. Um, and also developing your compositional chops. You know, you become a really good orchestrator. You become a really good working with harmony, working with contemporary techniques, and so forth. So that's a bit about the major. I feel like we've been having a lot of success with students who kind of go out. Some of them do go to graduate school in composition, but others do not. They go right into the field and are writing music.
Yeah, there's a couple of folks that we've been noting recently. There was a video that we were looking at earlier that you wanted to share.
Sure,
Uh,
should we look at that? Here's
I
one of
think I think it would be really interesting. Is it the Unika's maybe that would be a
yeah.
fun one for them to see, and you can
Yes.
hear a little bit
So
about this artist.
so Eunice is let's see here, is she graduated about 4, 5 years ago. A fabulous pianist, as you'll hear, and composer, and was a comp and film scoring major, but the jazz comp people really wanted her. She could kind of do everything. And she went off to do a master's at Juilliard and then moved out to LA and is was just signed by Deutsche Grammophon for some of her, which is very young for a composer to be signed like that. And she's really kind of taking the industry by storm. Let's check out a little bit of this piece. This is something she wrote her senior year. Can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
We're gonna just do a little sample there. But you get a sense of how let's see. The you can kind of tell her personality from that music right away.
Absolutely.
She's so joyous and she's got such skill and facility, but it's not really about that. It's about like conveying this sense of optimism and fun, you know.
Right. And just a quick note, because we have some colleagues here from our newest global partner at the Conservatory of Music in the Dominican Republic. The clarinetist Jose Ignacio is a student at that program. And so another example of like within your department, we have, this sort of global connection of a musician from Thailand and a musician from, the Dominican Republic playing this incredible music.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I'm excited about in our program is it's not a classical program. I encourage folks to bring in their traditional instruments. You know, we have some of our most accomplished students currently are playing oud and tar and voice, and they're writing pieces for like oud and string quartet. And this is the type of stuff we want to see. We want music to have an impact. We want it to speak. We want people to kind of listen to it.
So I've got a really interesting question for you now, because this is something that I love asking artists, especially with an audience like this. If you were looking back at yourself as a participant, as a student in this session now, your 18, 19, 20-year-old self, what are a couple of things you'd remind yourself or you'd want to, tell yourself to pay particular attention to on your artistic and musical journey?
Huh. I would say, you know, trust yourself. Really trust yourself musically. Um, and and when you feel good about something, like dig deep and figure out why that is, because that's the stuff that's going to hold you together. Don't just take anything for granted, but there's a lot you're going to take for granted because you're all like musically skilled. And when we're practicing all day, we don't have time to figure out why it feels so great. But sometimes you need to do that because when it doesn't feel so great, you can kind of go back. There are times where it definitely feels like you're being pulled in the wrong direction. Um, that's just how it is. Like that's just normal.
Sure.
So trust yourself and dig deep and double down with why you're doing what you're doing.
That's great advice. I love that. That's a very interesting perspective to take. And as you're looking now at this space of performing arts, of composition in current day, what are opportunities that you're seeing for the students that you're working with and the faculty members in your department? What are the things that you're kind of like encouraging them to check out now and to kind of, go after and dig into?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, our students, since we build skills in our program more than start them in a particular career, there are many careers they can go into. Obviously, writing for orchestral instruments is kind of the bread and butter of what we do, but it's not the only thing we do, and we're bringing in more collaboration, and technology. And then, video games and all these things like video games super interesting for composers. There are all these interesting puzzles to figure out. Um, I would say the skills that are most important that are really helpful in career is, collaboration. Like figuring out how do you work with people that you're going to create something that you feel is integral to yourself as well. And leadership skills. We talk a lot more about leadership skills than we used to, but how do you get in front of a group of musicians and convey the vision, knowing that everyone in that room might have a slightly different version of it? But that's okay. They're all individuals. But how do you find that unified vision that's going to lead to a musically coherent and exciting opportunity? So like those are two skills that are really important. And then in terms of the careers, the industry's changing a lot. It used to be, at least in the US, you had to have like a PhD or DMA in music composition, and then you'd kind of apply for professor positions, but there are very few of those. So that's not really the interesting pathway that most of our students take. I say that once they get out of Berklee, they're going to do a billion different things, but 5, 10 years later, they're going to find themselves in a more similar situation of writing music and being in the industry. So what you do those first few years is really up to you. But if you stick to composition, you're going to find yourself um, working in the field. And it could be, you can be writing for orchestra, you can be writing for winds, you can be writing for choirs. These are all different careers. You can be writing for media, you can be orchestrating and so forth. These are all different industries that you build connections in.
Yeah, I know where we are here in the Boston area in New England. Um, there's such a there's an audience. There's so many festivals that are happening, in different seasons, and I think in the earlier stages, composers getting connected to those opportunities, and as you said, being able to collaborate and bring together your own sort of project that you could actually take to these places and kind of get a foothold, is a really good step forward. Just, obviously when not like today, but when the weather changes, warmer and it's festival season, there's a lot that's going on. Um, I'd like to open it up. I know we've got a lot of folks here connected, and um, any of you that would like to open up and ask questions of Richard, you can raise your Simpsons looking Zoom hand and we can bring you on, or you could drop your question in the chat. But we'd like to open it up to all of you here. This is a great opportunity to talk to renowned composer who is active in the industry, leading our composition department here at Berklee, globally connected as an artist as well. So I'd like to turn it over to all of you here. So feel free, we can bring you into the session. You could drop your question in the chat. Anything that you'd like to ask about composition, about today's industry as a composer and as an artist. We'd love to hear from you, what questions that you have. So
Oh,
from
here's that.
yeah, Irene's got a great question here from she's a Berklee alumna, the founder and president of our global partner school in Kuala Lumpur, the International College of Music. Irene, thanks for being here tonight, and for you. It's very late there.
I'm enjoying this tremendously. Thank you so much, Richard. Well,
Oh,
my question was, since I have students as well, and and when we teach them composition, we teach them commercial composition
mhm.
simply because there's a career they have to go to after that, you see. So parents are always asking us, so what do they do after that? How do they get jobs? Particularly in a small country like Malaysia. Where do we get? So my question is, for careers in composition, for new music composers, how do you draw audiences to listen to your musical ideas?
Yeah,
Particularly something which is quite so unique as what you just, showed us. How do you draw audiences? From where do you get them?
yeah, it's a great question. It's something I think about all the time. I both struggle with and sometimes I have success stories. I mean, for example, you have to be in a place where there is an audience as well. I mean, for example, when I did that concert in New York, there were a lot of people there. This is something that happens in New York pretty regularly. And so I would say it's again, it's like you're building your audience, but you're also building your art. And the art that you build is not dependent on any one audience that you have. It's kind of broader than that. And so, some concerts you're going to have less people than others. Sometimes you have very few people in the audience, and sometimes it's a full house. And I've done both. And sometimes I can't predict which one's going to happen, but you're kind of building your work and you're building a profile of what music you want to do, which is going to help fuel possibly, in some places, if you have like a cool downtown concert with 30 people there, but it's the right 30 people, it's going to create your street cred for when 2 years later, a film person is going to be like, oh, I heard about this incredible concert and I want you in my film score. So I don't, I wouldn't you have to kind of think multilaterally in terms of audiences, but you also have to figure out what your audiences are interested in. If you want to start a chamber group in some cities, maybe that hasn't happened before, and you're going to have to like go around and find the people who are interested and ask them to help support this initiative. Maybe you go, to different institutions or different people of importance in that community and get their support, and then they can bring people in. So yeah, you have to do a lot of motivation if you want to do that, and see what people are interested in.
Thank you.
And in
Very
the
valuable.
yeah,
I
and
hope
in the
that-
meantime, you're juggling all these other things as you're trying to get that project off and running. Which
right.
is, yeah, it's something that I think we're all familiar with the students that we work with, and they come in with the idea of like, I'm going to be that one thing, and it's really getting them to open up to this sort of existence of being many, many different things in the industry and actually thriving in that
Yeah.
experience. Yeah,
And
wonderful.
it gets back to the leadership question of like, if you want to do this, if you think it's important, then go find the other people who are going to be interested in this.
Interested in the same thing.
And it's funny, like I had friends in Sweden and Iceland when I was a grad student, and they came to the US precisely because in Sweden and Iceland, they're asked to write orchestral music all the time, but they never write chamber music. So they came to the US because they were dying to write like string quartets and stuff. And everyone in the US is dying to write for orchestra because we never have access to that, but we have tons of chamber music. So it really depends on where you are, what is available and what's being funded and supported and so forth. And then composers always want what they don't have. So,
Yeah, being flexible. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you, Irene. Yeah. Um, other questions, again, you don't be shy. You can raise your hand and jump in, or you can drop your question in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. This is a great opportunity. We've got amazing folks from a number of global partners. Actually, we have I just saw that Dr. Richard Neary's here from our partner school in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Actually, we've got a question here from Roy. And he actually just sent it right to me. So I'll share this with you, Richard. It is, I'm a composer of absolute music. I'm very interested in cooperating counterpoint into modern contemporary classical concert music. I love your suggestions about composers, which are working in this field, tips about getting into the work in the field of chamber music and sacred vocal music. All right, so Richard is shooting broadly here. He's got a lot of different things on his mind. I'm gonna actually copy this and paste it into the chat so everybody else can see this. Zoom will let me do it. Here we go. All right, so take a look at that, Richard.
That's a great question. That's a very deep question. Of course, counterpoint is one of the fundamental ways we put sounds together, right? We either put sounds together vertically or horizontally, and horizontally they kind of come together. Some, I think one thing we should talk maybe offline about this because it's a big question, but counterpoint means something different in the 21st century than it does in the 16th and 18th century, for example, in Western music and in different musical traditions. And I'd be curious to know what it means to you. For example, can you do microtonal counterpoint? Can you do a counterpoint of timbres as opposed to pitches? These types of questions. So when you start getting into that, there are a lot of composers that I would recommend you look into.
Hello, does anyone see me?
We see you.
Hey,
Hi,
Roy, how are you?
Yes, I'm just to be clear, I'm from Israel. I'm from the Rimon program. Okay, from the Rimon, and I'm so glad to see you both. So first of all, thank you. What I mean by that is that I'm a big I adore this craft of making lines cooperate with each other, and I'm interested to, like you said, doing things with timbre and not just melodic lines and of course it's just a very great. I think it's if I would have to pick one technique that I would use for my whole life as a composer, it would be counterpoint, because I think it's the most effective way that I can express myself musically, rather than orchestration and the other things, harmony, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, but that it doesn't mean that I won't be using orchestration, because I do love orchestration. I just think that there's great potential into utilizing it in the modern language, in the 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so what I would say, Roy, that's a great point. A few things that I would suggest. A lot of contemporary modern timbral counterpoint comes from Ligeti, Jorge Ligeti, and check out his choral music in particular, and micropolyphony techniques, where he's kind of dealing with counterpoint on a very micro level. So counterpoint becomes a sound mass. And there are a lot of composers that are post-Ligeti that are interesting looking at. My former teacher for many years is Brian Ferneyhough, F-E-R-N-E-Y-H-O-U-G-H. And he's an English composer, and he's written some pretty outrageous vocal music, which you might want to check out as well. But those are two places to start.
Can you put the name of your...
I'll write it. Yeah.
That was a lot of letters really fast.
Sorry.
Roy, thank you for the question. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Yes.
Yeah. Great question. Yeah, okay, so we've got some homework to do there with Ryan Fernio. Very nice. Other questions, this is a great opportunity again to check in and ask about this incredible space of creativity from Dr. Richard Carrick, and also about the program at Berklee, the composition program. So feel free, you can drop your questions in the chat, and you can also
Sorry, did you have a question?
Can I go back to be a student again?
I know, right? Absolutely.
Oh, I know. Yeah, these Zooms bring me back. I really want to get, first of all, again, to say thank you for this session. Jason and Richard, and great to see you, Irene, and thank you for all the students and Mitchell here and everyone. And definitely we're gonna see you soon in the flesh, as we said. I'm just curious, it's a major topic about improvisation. Okay. So, I mean, when you put a piece of music for non-jazz musicians to improvise over, I mean, are you giving them chord changes? Because the jazzers, we give them chord changes and we say, hey, go, right? Are you giving them melodic fragments that they need to use in their whatever improvisational ideas?
Mm.
What kind of instructions do you give them, if any, when you're dealing with non-jazz musicians that you ask them to improvise in general? I know it's a big question, but anything.
Oh, it's a
Because,
good question.
yeah.
I think I want to just maybe I want to show you the score, because sorry, I'm looking for something, but I don't think I'm going to find it. So improvisation. Okay, here we go. I want to show you the score, because improv, you really have to know what your player is comfortable with. So, for example, there's a reason why jazz and classical are actually trained differently, is because it requires some skill sets are very, very different, and a lot of people can do both. But if you didn't learn one, you can't just improvise over changes. That's probably the hardest thing to do in jazz. Improvisation without changes is a lot easier for classical musicians than it is actually giving them changes. So, like, one of the things that in my piece in particular, we're not playing over changes. We're actually playing over notated things. I'll show you a little bit of what I'm talking about here. Here's the score. Can you see that? So you see, like, some of the things is we start an idea, but then as the pianist and composer, I kind of know what I want to do. So I improvise. I just kind of keep going. And then I have like a musical cue which brings in the violin. And once the violin comes in, we're kind of following the notation. But you see, I use this notation. I'm still improvising here. I've kind of written the background, and then I can just kind of go in and out of what they're doing, because I know what they're going to do. They're completely notated, but I'm kind of improvising through here. So I'm reacting to what I hear. So that's one example. A second example is I really got into graphic scores. And you can see this is the second movement. It should be flipped sideways, but you can see the string part is here and the piano part is here. And we just use graphic scores. And the reason I like graphic scores is it tells you when you're supposed to play. It gives you an impression of what it should sound like, but it doesn't tell you what the pitches are, right? So you're actually very free pitch-wise. So this frees musicians up to feel more empowered. They're not like having to play against a chord change or something like that. And then we can make sounds and vertically, again, I'm sorry, it should be, rotated over, but you can see where things synchronize. And then sometimes, it's all fully notated. And then you have these moments where, where people just improvise. Right here, repeat 12 measures until the violin solo ends. So there are lots of different ways to deal with improvisation. And all of these ways are really based on the players themselves. But as I mentioned, I think at this point, classical musicians are comfortable improvising if it's not over chord changes, but if there's a groove. And then some players are really comfortable over chord changes. Some people are more comfortable in kind of dealing with timbre and microtonality than others. But you don't have to write a piece for everybody. You just got to write a piece for the players. And once you've written the piece, other players, it will be easier for them to learn what you need to do, you know. So if people are not comfortable with improvising, but they see how the piece works in totality, they might be more comfortable jumping into that as opposed to calling themselves an improviser.
Wonderful. Yeah, this is wonderful. Great examples, Richard. Thank you for sharing those.
Thank you.
Actually, right from the score. Irene added another question, which is, I think, really maybe on the minds of other folks here. You know, has your mathematical mind influenced your compositional approach?
You know, we know very little about our own minds, right? So I think we just see the results of our minds in process, but we don't have much control over our minds. So probably it's all there. I mean, I'd say early on as a composer, I was really interested in formally understanding structure and large scale form and really kind of thinking about harmony and timbre and organizing it. So I do think about things that way. I think the more I compose, the more I'm kind of developing, you know, I know what my musical instincts are and I've developed them and I've kind of refined them to what I want to hear. So I'm much more instinctive now as a composer than I used to be. But when I was a student, there was a lot of analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. That's very interesting. Yeah. Wow. This has been let's see. Oh, Yakov's got a great question here.
More into composition, more complicated. That's a great question, actually, Yakov. Where's Yakov?
Fine.
Absolutely. I actually developed a class here at Berklee called Introduction to Composition. And I'm developing a Berklee online class, developing your creativity in music. And it's specifically for folks who want to do more outside the box approaches in whatever field they are. So a lot of times it can be more orchestration rather than composition. We're dealing with song form. There's some cool things you can do within the song form, but also the orchestration is where all the creativity happens in songs. I mean, you know, the instrumentation, the electronics, acoustics, processing, all of that stuff, the extended piano stuff. I would say, you know, one thing you can do is, I don't know how you compose, but if you're composing on your instrument and singing, maybe write out your lead sheet and then get away from your instrument and get away from singing and say, okay, what's the most absurd instrument that I could have play this piece? You know, as opposed to guitar and voice, like what if it was two trombones and kazoo or something like that? What would that sound like? What would that look like? What is that going to inspire you to do differently or add to your music that you hadn't thought of when you're actually singing and performing? And likewise, if you're a person who's sitting at the desk and writing your songs, go to an instrument you're not comfortable with and come up with some sounds that will enhance what you've done. So, you know, trying to dimensionalize your process will also dimensionalize the music that you produce.
I love that. That's a very interesting avenue to travel down. That's, you know, especially for songwriters
Yeah.
to dig into, you know, and yeah, wow, whole other masterclass on that. And then Nadav has got a question. We'll take this one last question because we're at the top of the hour here.
What would you recommend for someone who wants to start by orchestrating for other composers? What would you look for in an assistant orchestrator? Any scores are really fun. Oh, that's a really good question. So, you should look at a variety of scores because if somebody needs an orchestrator, what they're going to need is an orchestrator who knows many different styles, right? So if a composer is too busy to do their own orchestration, they're going to need somebody you can say, oh, I really want this to sound like Hans Zimmer. I really want this to sound like Thomas Addis, or I really want this to sound like Benjamin Britten. And so you have to know the important repertoire and understand the orchestration. So, you know, in terms of contemporary concert composers, Thomas Addis is huge. Um, uh, um, um, Kaya Saariaho is a really interesting orchestrator, Finnish composer. She recently passed away, hugely influential. I mean, there are a lot of great, look to see what's happening at the New York Phil, at the Barbican, and places like that. But I'd say that's what you need is if you want to go into that field, because that's what you're going to be asked to do. In the film composers, of course, and yeah, I'd say that. Does that, I hope that's helpful.
I think that's a great answer. And we'll take one more because Shakar has got, you know, a topic that's top of mind. I know we're talking about it and working with it
Oh,
quite a bit at Berklee,
sorry.
but what's
I-
your opinion here with AI and music, and how do you see that impacting your work? And, you know, are you introducing it to your students in some way in the creative process as composers?
It's the $1 million question or the Bitcoin question or whatever you're going to call it. AI is we don't know what's going to happen with AI, right? It's replacing intelligence, right? It's not replacing creativity. It's artificial intelligence. It's not AC. So focus on the C, focus on the creativity. AI will probably be able to orchestrate a tune for you in a particular style, maybe. I don't know. But we're in the composition program, which is we're not dealing with AI that directly. I know AI is being dealt with a lot, like in mixing and mastering. We already, of course, do it all the time. And in some of the other writing programs, I know in songwriting, they're looking at it and saying, how can AI help with writing lyrics? You know, come up with topics, have it spew out a bunch of different words, and then you're inspired. You have a more direct uh, kind of interaction with the possibilities.
Yeah, we've seen it also in, you know, already in just notation software. It's been
Mhm.
out for a long time, you know,
Yeah.
just sort of these sort of, you know, plugins of, you know, harmonization and or, you know, and things like that. So it's already been in the mix. But I think you're right. It's the idea of, you know, this is what in this body of folks that are here in the session, the idea of that creativity, the idea of these, you know, each person here has got unique influences and is always exploring other influences. And I think that's where, you know, the human creative awareness of their environment and, you know, is going to be the thing that will keep creativity unique.
Yeah.
And I think it's what the audiences will be looking for and wanting to appreciate. And then those folks who actually are incorporating, I mean, I think of like what you were sharing earlier, actually was in the conversation before we started, the Anthony Braxton piece. And just like, you know, there have been composers that are been incorporating technology into their pieces for a long time as well. So it's sort of like it's a continuum,
Yeah.
but the creativity is at the heart of what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Anthony Braxton, if you don't know his music, he's a great it's our that's talk about improvisation. This is a guy who takes improvisation and notation to a
Oh
whole new.
yeah.
Yeah.
I listened to him when I was 19.
Yeah.
I'm only 25, you know.
Folks, big round of applause to you, Richard, for taking time and meeting with us and presenting. This is the first session for this week with our partners, the Rimon School of Jazz and Contemporary Music. We really appreciate you sharing your experience, your expertise, these examples that you brought, and just your perspective on, you know, the motivation to the modern day composer and keeping folks engaged and being creative. Any final words you want to share with the audience today before we break?
Um, no, I think, you know, just go do it all and have a great time doing it. And, you know, I'm always happy to answer questions if you want to email me. Jason, thanks so much for all your questions, and Irene and everybody. It's lovely to meet you all. And everyone in Rimon, it's great to see you all, and I hope to see you all soon. And
Yes.
that's it.
For those of you that are here, we have sessions the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we're going to be meeting with the chair of music production and engineering, Rob Jasko. He's going to be digging into an area that is, happening. It's the independent recording professional and what people are doing at, world-class levels in their home studios. And then on Thursday, we've got Assistant Professor of Songwriting, Valerie Orth, is going to be here with the president of the Rimon School, Yehuda Eder, and they're going to be digging into doing some critiquing of some of the songwriters at the Rimon School and talking about songwriting. And then on a Friday, we've got a bonus session. We actually have our chair and assistant chair of the guitar department, Dr. Kim Perlak and Cheryl Bailey are going to be joining us for a special session to share updates about what's going on in the world of guitar. So it's an incredible week. We'd love to be connecting with all of you in person. We're hoping to get out in the world more this year, but for now, come and join us. The link that I dropped in there, that link tree link will get you to all of the registrations for these Zoom sessions. Please follow Richard online. Keep an eye, go to his website, check him out on Instagram, and support his work where you can. And obviously you can reach out to he in the department at Berklee if you have questions. Izhar and Mitchell, any thoughts or things that you'd like to share with the audience before we break for today?
I would just say really thank you, Jason, Richard. Great to see you. And this is, it's always great to get into these discussions, and there's so much going on. And it's so great to see all these young people here that are still here for the music. And yes, a great connection, as always, between Berklee and Rimon. And we're looking forward for tomorrow. And thank you for everything.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks to all of our partners, Irene from Malaysia, Walter from Brazil, and folks from the Dominican Republic. We really appreciate you all joining, and we're looking forward to see you tomorrow at the next session. Have a good night, have a good day, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.